So I will first start with the conclusion so that we understand what I'm trying to say. And the conclusion of my presentation will be that situation matters, and it determines what questions will be asked at a certain time in the human history, which could not be asked before. Therefore, understanding the Quran starts with our current reality and then asks us to look backward in history instead of vice versa. This requires our personal engagement with the text of the Quran instead of engagement with the tafsir first. A tafsir is the understanding of a human being and not the text to be understood. Therefore, this presentation deals with the importance of method in understanding the Quran. Certainly, there is no the method, but we can look at some methods, and I will be only concentrating on one method, which basically is coming from the Farai school and then philosophically illuminated by Dr. Irfan Khan. So I will follow this sequence. There are some general remarks, and these remarks are disjointed remarks, but they will play an important role in how the whole thing is connected by the time we reach the presentation. The second topic is going to be the levels of understanding the Quran. The third will be how do we understand reality, and use the same mechanisms to understand reality. How do those apply to text? And when I say reality, what I mean is the existence, the universe, and everything that we get in touch with. And the last item is going to be that the implications for understanding the Quran based on what I have discussed. Let us start with the general remarks. The first remark is that nothing in the world knows how to live. Meaning that unless there is a hindrance, there is some new situation, is not in the habit of sitting down thinking about things. Rather, a being only asks the questions when it is faced with some problem. And that is very important, because what the problem we face determines what are the questions we are going to ask about. Being asked a question when it encounters a situation. If there is no situation, the being will continue its work. Well, if I have a room in my home and there is no door, not pay attention, I will just continue going through the door and coming back. But if somebody puts a glass door that I cannot see whether it is a door or not, and I go, and instead of getting out, I get hit with the door, I will ask what happened, and then I will start my investigation. Now, another question in the same aspect is that do human beings think before they act? Because they have to act, therefore they think. It's important also, and in the same direction, that since we have to exist and struggle for our existence, we think. It is not the case that being is in the habit of sitting down and keep thinking about things. No, when we have to live our life, we face the environment or the resistances. And therefore, because we have to survive and we have to live, therefore, we think that how to deal with it. Another point is this, that the Quranic God has been creating, is creating, and will continue to create. And every moment of his life, which is reflected in creation, is a new creation. And we learn from Quran that God not only creates, but he guides also. So every new creation requires new guidance. So what I mean is this, that when a human being is born, God thinks about that human being. Because God says, I make human beings with my own hand. It is continuous dynamic process. And he creates that human being. And the sum total of all the human beings or all the existences that are right now, they form the current reality. And it is changing every moment. So we need guidance for each new situation as God's life or God activity continues. And the last one, not the last one, another point is this, that for new guidance, we have to consider Quran as a primary source of guidance for us in our current existence, because it's a totally new reality that never existed before. We cannot take Quran as a secondary source, that it came in some time and place, and then we understand it in that time and place, and then bring it into our new reality. Rather, we need to look at the Quranic revelation because we are new creation. And for that new creation, Quran is the primary guidance in our circumstance. We see the same thing in the life of the Prophet. Prophet was living in a space and time, in a culture. Revelation comes to him. He understands the revelation in his current reality and then tries to change that reality. Okay. When the prophet is told about the stories of previous prophets, it is in reference to that prophet has to act in his current situation. And that is why he is told the story, or he is given an example, and also the people who are listening to it, for acting in the new situation. It is not for this purpose that what that prophet did in that situation, that has to be repeated. Number 6, Quran is also very clear that guidance comes only from God, not even from the prophet. Quran is very, very clear. The purpose of the messengerhood of the prophet was to deliver the message. It was not to convert the people. The prophet wanted his uncle very badly to get guidance. He could not guide him. Similarly, he has to pray for guidance for the conversion of Hazrat Umar or Abu Lahab. So Quran is very, very clear on this also, that guidance comes from God only, and that depends how the interaction between God and that human being has been taking place, and what is the inner state of that human being. And God deals with human being on that individual level. God created capable human beings and provided them with all the resources to live a successful life. Okay? He put in us consciousness of God and the knowledge of good and bad. And the point is this, That is why the Quran does not bring us anything new, but it calls itself a reminder. A reminder is not a law. A guidance is not a law. And what I mean is this, that the guidance is that if I have to go to Detroit, I should be going east. Instead, I am facing south and going towards St. Louis. Now, the faster I move towards St. Louis, the farther away I am getting from my destination. And somebody comes and shows me, no, you need to turn around and go towards east. That is guidance. Guidance is not going to, that person is not going to tell me, okay, when you will go towards Detroit, this will come and that will come and you will experience this. All the problems, I may run out of gas, I have an accident, maybe my time, all those things I have to face and solve them. But if I am misguided and going in the opposite direction, that direction is changed. This is how the guidance, in a way, is. Law, by definition, happens in the particularity of a situation. If there is no particular situation, the same law is applied differently. For example, if we take the cutting the hand of a thief, okay, this used to be what happened in that tribal society. They used to cut the hand of a thief. Okay. Why? Because there is no police, there is no jail. If you run out of the desert, nobody will catch you. Okay. So right there, you are caught and your hand is cut and the matter is resolved. Okay. Now, if the case was that society was cutting the hands and the guard said, don't cut the hand, but whip that person 100 times, we would see that there is some sacredness to it. They were cutting the hands in that situation, that worked in that culture. So it included. All right. Now, the levels of understanding the Quran. To me, that's what I have come to understand, and the understanding never is final. But there are 3 levels of understanding the Quran. The first level is individual. The second level is communal. How do a community of individuals come to understand or come to a certain understanding by which they will live their life? And then understanding at a nation-state level. The 3 situations of understanding are different, and they require different methodologies to understand the Quran. My main concern in the presentation is individual and communal understanding of the Quran. If we have time, I can just quickly go over in the nation state, but that's not the focus. All right. Now, my next discussion is going to be how do we understand reality? So we will come back to this, what's the difference between individual understanding and the communal understanding. So in this section, what I will do is this, what is reality or real world? What is ideal world? And what is linguistic world? And I will be talking about the existences of these 3 worlds, because these 3 worlds play a role in how we understand reality. So that's going to be a little bit longer discussion, and I would like to see, maybe some people so that I can be speaking to them. So how do we understand reality? As I already said, by reality, we mean that what really exists. Okay, for example, an apple exists. If there are no human beings, that apple will continue to exist. The existences of reality, you can touch them, you can hold them, you can wear them. Okay. They really exist as compared to the two other worlds, the world of ideas and the world of language. The purpose of this discussion is going to be that what are the upper and lower limits of human understanding? Because what we can understand, we are limited by what our limits of understanding are. So I will move toward that direction. So I just introduced the real world and the existences of real world. They really exist and they don't need a mind for their existence. When we talk about ideal world or the world of ideas, okay, they exist in our mind. They do not have existence outside. Okay. They may be the existences of the real world. For example, I can think of an apple. An apple exists in reality, and I can have an idea of apple in my mind. Okay. However, the ideal world can also think of existences that do not exist in the real world. Because what I can think, that thing really exists in the ideal world. It may or may not exist in the real world. I can think of an elephant of the size of a cat. Now, in the real world, this is impossible. This is an impossibility of the real world, because by birth, when an elephant is born, it is much bigger than a cat. But as far as the existence of my ideal world is concerned, because I can think, therefore, it really exists in my mind. But the ideal world is so large that I can think of existences that I cannot even picture. But since I can think about them, they exist in my mind. For example, I can think about a circle which is like a rectangle. Okay, I cannot imagine that. But since I can think about it, it really exists. Okay. So there's a sharp difference between the existences of the real world and the existences of the ideal world. And we will see how the interplay between them takes place. Before we come to that, we have to understand another world, which is the linguistic world. And what are the existences of the linguistic world? Because linguistic world has to plays a role in understanding what is real. And how is that? So the linguistic world comes into being when we write something in the form of a text. Okay. So when I say that or write a sentence, this is a red apple. Now, since I can write this sentence, this is a red apple, it really exists in the language, in the world of the language. It can exist in the real world also. And certainly, because I can think about it, it does exist in my world of ideas also. Now, why language is necessary to understand the reality? The reason is this, that in order to think, we have to have linguistic names. So, and that's number one. And number two, that in order for two human minds or more human minds, the way we can communicate is through language. What is in my mind, or how I am feeling, or what I want to describe, it has to be transferred to another mind through the world of language. That is why, So, for example, the existences of the world of language, we will call them they really exist when the text says so. They may or may not exist in the real world. So, for example, if there is a story that somebody writes a sentence, yesterday at 8 a.m., I saw 5 fire trucks going towards east, and I saw a smoke far behind. Okay. Now, if we want to understand this story, we can only talk about the things that exist because of the language. So what exists? Yesterday exists in this story. 8 a.m. exists yesterday. And then these 5 fire trucks that are going towards east, they exist. And there is some smoke. It exists. However, after reading this story, I go and tell somebody that there was a fire in east. That the text does not say. Text does not use the word fire. The existences of the linguistic world are only what are in the text. If I have to say that what does this text say, I can say that, well, there were fire engines and going, and I saw them and they were going towards the east. But I cannot say that there was a fire because the text does not say. All I can say is this, that probably there was a fire. So I have to differentiate between what I am bringing into the story and what the text says in the story. Okay. So we have to be very, very careful that in order to understand the textual world, we really have to pay attention to the words of the text, because those words create the world of the text. And I have to stay within that. And if I have to bring my understanding, I have to say that this is what I'm concluding. Okay. All right. So another point is this, that in the textual world, the meanings of the words, they come from the literary context of the event. The woman is in the kitchen and the husband is in the sitting room. They cannot see each other, but they both know they can hear each other. And their 4 or 5 year child comes that Eid is coming. Where is my gift? And the child asks this question to mother. And the mother says, 5 days are left. Your gift will be here. Now, the context of the story will tell us whether she was saying these words to the child or whether she's saying these words to her husband. Why? Because maybe the story tells us that this is a lazy husband who is always late in bringing the toys or whatever the case may be. And when child comes and asks, is coming, she's not talking to the child in the context of the story. She's talking to her husband. 5 days are left. The toys will be here. Now, in the real world, her tone of voice will communicate that. Maybe the words remain the same, but the way she expresses, 5 days are left. Toys will be here. Okay. The words remain the same, but the way she speaks, tells us that she is speaking to her husband, and also the context of the story. So therefore, it is very, very important that the meaning of the words, they come from the context of the story. Okay. Now, similarly, but how does the story has to tell us who she is speaking to. Okay. Now, let us see one more thing. Okay, maybe we will come back to that. So when we want to understand, how do we understand? What is the process of understanding something in the reality? Okay, the process is this, that first we look at it, but there is an apple in the real world, and the apple is on the table. I have to use my basar. I have to see. This is the process. The first thing I see an apple in reality. Now that apple in reality creates an image of apple in my mind. Okay. And then also with that image, I have the linguistic symbol APPLE, because in order for me to understand that the apple is on the table and table is not on the apple, okay, I cannot think that in a sense that, okay, there is this round red thing which is on top of a four-legged rectangle. I have to give it a name, and we have to agree on the linguistic symbols in order for us to communicate and even to think myself. Now, there is one more problem, that when I try to understand reality, since how do I do it? The apple which exists in reality, it is an organic whole of color, shape, size, weight, texture, okay? But when I think about apple in my mind, I have to say, okay, it's a circle, it's a red color, it has this smell, it has this taste, it has this weight. The nature of my mind is that when I try to understand anything in the reality, I have to decompose that reality into components into my mind, and then get some image or some reality of that apple. I can never have what it means for an apple to have the integrated wholeness of the apple. My mind cannot understand it. No matter how much science progresses, or no matter, the limitation of my mind is that in reality, the color, size, shape, they all exist as one, which we in Urdu or in Arabic can say wujud. I cannot existence the being of that apple as it really is. Okay, my mind decomposed into components. Okay, so therefore, this is lower limit of our understanding, that I cannot understand reality as a whole, as an integrated whole, no matter what I do. So this is the lower limit of human understanding. Okay, what is the upper limit of human understanding? The upper limit of human understanding is what I can think. If I cannot think something, I cannot know it. And this thinking is because it is in the ideal world. It may or may not exist in the reality. It may or may not, be possible for me to imagine. As long as I can think, okay, that is the upper limit of my reality, of my understanding. However, the interesting thing about upper limit of our understanding is this, that it keeps on increasing. It keeps on increasing because human knowledge and human understanding keeps on increasing. So at one point in human history, when people saw an apple, okay, for their living life, this was sufficient, that we gave it a symbol, apple, A-P-P-L-E, and also we have some idea of apple. So if the apple is brown or green or whatever, we still understood, okay, this is an apple and not a banana, and it is good enough to live our life. But today, when I look at that apple, I understand that apple very differently, that this is organic matter, and what the atoms inside in it are. And so my depth of understanding increases as the time is passing. So therefore, my knowledge of knowing, it keeps on increasing. But at one point in time, my thinking is bounded because I cannot think beyond what we know right now. However, this boundary increases as our human knowledge and experiences life increases. So therefore, the process of knowing reality comes down to looking at a real thing. It's giving it a name, a linguistic symbol, and then there is an image in my mind, and I also understood that how my level of knowing is limited, what I can understand and what I cannot understand, and what I may understand in future, even though, so the limits, upper and lower limits. Now, after knowing these things, let us see that how do we understand texts? Because the mechanisms of understanding and the process of understanding is going to be similar, because I have the Sama, Basar, and Fawad, which I'm using to understand. So when I look at the text, the first thing I see is the linguistic world. Whereas when I was looking at the reality, the first thing I was seeing was a real thing. The real thing is the product of nature. But this text, it is a product of human mind in human language. Okay. So when I look at that text, I am looking at an abstraction of the reality in human language. And since I understand that language, and the language, the text says that there is an elephant of the size of cat. This is what the text says. Okay, I understand in my world of ideas, I can imagine and I can understand, okay, that there is an elephant of the size of cat. So I understood what the world of the text through its symbols is telling me. However, in order to know the truth of that linguistic world and my understanding of that linguistic world, I have to go out into the real world to find out if it is true or not. So therefore, in order for us to understand text, we have to verify. And when I go all over the world and I never see an elephant, or nobody has told me that they have seen that, I may come to the conclusion that an elephant does not exist of the size of a cat. But if I want to understand that story in which this is taking place, I really have to believe that in this world of the text, really an elephant of the size of cat exists. If I reject that, I won't be able to understand the story. So I have to believe in the word of the text in order to understand what the text is saying. It may or may not be possibility of the real world, but you see the difference in trying to understand a reality and in other, because a text is a cultural product. The text will not exist if there were no human beings. Okay. Now, another question. Right now. I'm not talking about Quran. I'm just talking about text. Another question is this: that what is the meaning of the text, and which meaning is the authentic meaning? So the question becomes that, do I have to understand what the author meant, then I will reach the true meaning? Okay, if I establish this criteria, that my true understanding is going to be that what the author meant, then I have understood it correctly. But text are voices from the past. Even when I say that I have understood what the author intended, how do I know? Because the author is dead. I don't have access. This is what it means for a text, that you do not have access to the author. So text, what is text? It's a cultural product, just like a painting or just like a sculpture or just like an architecture. And I am a being who is interacting with this piece of work. And what really matters is what it is saying to me to help me live my life. Okay. Now, if there is another person, who is a PhD in English language and he reads the same story, okay, what he's going to understand or she's going to understand is going to be very different from what I may understand. Because this is what they call the birth of the reader. The reader does not come to the text empty-handed. The reader comes with his or her subjectivities that he or she cannot escape coming to the text. Okay, so in order to know the truth of the text, we have to find whether it is the truth or not. So there is a difference between knowledge and knowing. So let's imagine that I am at a valley and I have to cross that valley, and I'm standing at that valley and I have read everything about that valley. What are different paths? What are the best way to go? Where are the lines and where are the bad earth? Everything that I could know, I know. Does it mean that I know? No. These are all possibilities of knowing. Even maybe I have a GPS and I know exactly what is there. Okay? I still don't know. Unless I take the first step and the second step and the third step, unless I have acted, because I have to make a decision which path to take among all the knowledge that I have gathered. Because I have to act, I have to choose, I have to decide what is the best way to go. So therefore, unless I have taken the step and started walking, okay, based on that choice, it will reveal to me that what was the best path. Maybe I walk 10 steps and I put the next step and there is a hole and I fall down. And that has never happened in history. Okay. So one is the possibility of knowing, and the actually is knowing. So therefore, the text, unless we act upon it, there is no knowledge. There's only a possibility of knowledge. And the success of my knowing is going to be that what the text was telling and what I discovered. So it's in pragmatism. I have to act upon it to know its truth in the real world. Okay, so now I don't know how much time has passed. Can somebody tell me how much more time I have?
Take as much time as you want.
No, we have to finish in 1 hour. I can
15 more minutes.
15 more minutes. Okay. So now I will come towards the implications for understanding Quran and also the difference of understanding the Quran as an individual and as a community. The first thing we note about Quran as a believer, that the author of the text is not dead. Each individual has direct access to that author. So when we say about an individual, how does an individual understand? The individual has to interact with the text. It has to listen carefully what the text is saying. If the person is not reading the text, but the understanding of some mufassir, he's not even trying to understand the text. He's trying to understand the understanding of some human being. Okay, so it is critical that the person who's trying to understand what God is saying has to read the text. Now the question becomes, the person doesn't know Arabic, the person doesn't know which translation to give and take, understand. But the conditions for guidance, which are in the Quran, are that Quran really doesn't care about these things. What Quran wants is that the person first should feel that I need guidance. If the person doesn't have this need for guidance, he or she can be reading because he feels, am I already guided? The second is the sincerity. You really want to understand. And it doesn't matter whose translation you read or how much Arabic you need, when you have your pure intention and you read the text, even if you understand incorrectly, you will get guidance. But you have to engage with the text at whatever level. That's the first step. The second step is this, that we are giving sama basar and fuad. Our engagement with the text and our teachers should build in us the capacities so that we can understand the text. We don't want them to tell, okay, this is what it means, because the text and what God wants to say is individual. You may read one thing and I may read the same thing, but we may understand differently because there are certain things in my life, nobody knows about it. And within those words, God may have spoken with me that the same words would not have spoken to you. So we have to get rid of this idea that I have understood and I will tell you what it means. Our teachers need to develop capabilities, and the students should also know that they have to engage with the Quran and try to improve how they understand. Okay, so it is very easy at the individual level. However, there should be a progress and there should be a different approach when we are trying to have people understand the Quran. Okay, so one of the things of what we have understood so far is that our reading is always subjective. This is a human limitation. It is not the case that when I read a text and the text says this is a microwave and I will understand this is a fridge. No. But there are meanings. For example, the words, the difference between the language of science and the language of art or the language of literature is that in religious language or in language of literature, the word remains the same. The word God remains the same. But with our increasing individual life experiences and our self developing the capabilities to understand, the same word God will have deeper and deeper and deeper meanings. Whereas the language of science, the boundaries of meaning are very, they're very soft. If there's acceleration, it is exactly defined. The moment you say that it is acceleration because of the Earth gravity, you give it a new name. You call it a G, even though even in this case the concept is same. So the boundaries of meaning in science are very easily breakable, but the boundaries of meaning have depth in the language of religion and in the language of literature. That because it depends on the reader, that what reader brings to that text. Okay, so I think the individual understanding then, as long as the individual is trying to understand the text and really wants to get guidance, God will guide that person. But that a person should understand that he has or she has to equip and increase his or her capacities, learn the skills, learn the methods, and there has to be teachers who could do that. Because in the end, at the individual level, the understanding is subjective. All right, what about the understanding at the community level? Well, the revelation or understanding comes to human beings. It does not come to an institution. WCMIR, for example, or Darul Falah, okay? These are a human construction. They don't really exist. They exist in our mind. And the revelation comes to the be, who is real, or the human being, or God gives guidance to everything that he creates. Okay, so therefore, the individuals have to understand, and then those individuals have to come together and authenticate and negotiate meaning for the community. Even at that authenticated and negotiated meaning, the Quran expects us that the individual may or may not accept the community's understanding, because that person is personally and individually liable to God. Okay, so and in science we have a very clear understanding, because we know that the knowledge and the understanding is created in a community. Every scientist works in certain paradigm, he thinks in certain ways, and he or she reaches some conclusions, and then he publishes that. And then other people comment on it. So there is a negotiation of meaning. And there is an authentication of meaning. But all this authentication and negotiation is temporary, because whenever there are two human beings in discourse, there is going to be a power dimension. We have this in science also. Neil, who gave the idea of quantum states of atom, okay, Einstein was not accepting that the nature is not quantized. So there was a long time the scientific community did not believe him, because Einstein was saying that. But when the data and the experiments became so much, that we had to accept. So therefore, every human authentication and negotiation is temporary till somebody brings better understanding, and a new negotiation and authentication has to take place. So therefore, one more idea I want to present is this, that it is not the way being works that you learn all the knowledge about Islam and Quran and history and this and that, and then you are ready to understand what the Quran says. This never happens. It is the point in time where the reality is and the being is faced with the existential problems that the being has to go and try to solve it. Use his or her mind, get guidance, make dua, and then go back and see how others have understood, which are human negotiated meanings of the past. They may or may not have any authenticity for us, because we are not living in the same time. We are living in a new creation. Our whole view of the universe and what we know is totally different. They believed in a universe that existed from ever and stayed forever. There was no concept that, oh my God, it is expanding and it is changing every moment. And one last thing that I want to say is, so for example, if I am an electrical engineer, I have an insight, but when I go to work, I am faced with a problem to solve, and I use my intuition and try to understand. But when I am stuck or don't understand, I go back and see how other people thought about it. Okay. So the current situation and the current question, when the question is raised, and the question is raised only when being is faced with a problem and being has to solve that problem. Okay, so that starts with what exists now. New, fresh thinking, and then you can go back and see other thought, accept or reject, or accept some, or maybe you get some more insight. But the starting point has to be the being, which is in the current situation. So we really have to question that, what does it mean to understand the Quran? And what are the methodologies that we have to teach? Because in the end, it is the individual interaction with the text and God who is going to lead the way. So I think I will stop my presentation at this, and